En este cuadro podemos ver la composición de...
In this slide, we can see the composition of a hen's egg. I'm showing this in order to show the importance of the shell content. As you can see, we're speaking between 10 and 11% of shell, which accounts for 6.2% of mineral components. Here you can see the composition of the egg shell. And as you can see, a large percentage is on calcium carbonate, and obviously we have magnesium carbonate and tricalcium phosphate as part of the minerals. This composition is important because if you are to measure the shell of your hens and you see that the tricalcium phosphate increases, this means that we have too much of the hen's bone participating in the deposition of components in the shell, which means that the hen is malnourished, minerally speaking. Let's take a look at important considerations. The hen produces 10 times more its body weight in eggs. Each shell weighs 6.6 grams and contains over 2.2 grams of calcium. The hen delivers 2 kilograms of eggshell in the places it lays, which represents 700 grams of calcium. The hen's body barely has 20 grams of calcium, which means that the hen deposits 10% of its body calcium in each egg, which means that if I don't give a nutrient diet to the hen, in 10-20 days or 2 weeks later, the hen lays and dies. The deposition calcium rate is extremely high when laying or forming the eggshell. It may go from 100 to 2 milligrams per hour. A layer would take between 10 to 20 hours in order to remove all the body calcium. So take a look at how important it is to have calcium in the GI tract for the hen to take advantage of it. During the shell formation, a layer needs from 2 to 2.5 grams of calcium in an 18-20 hour period, every 24 hours according to the production cycle. At the peak of a shell formation, the layer removes all the circulating calcium in 15 minutes. If this is not substituted, the layer dies. Therefore, it is extremely important for us to supply low solubility calcium to the hen. This, together with the source, increases the particles, is achieved through particle size. In other words, the egg is the only natural food that comes from the animal because the shell is like a package. So we must take care of the package, since most of the economic losses in egg production is due to hens dying from bad nutrition or eggshells broken. Let's speak about calcium. It's a metallic mineral, electropositive, bivalent. It's the most abundant mineral in the animal. 99% is present in the oons and 1% in the circulating blood ionically. It's the major constituent. We've said that calcium is involved in certain biochemical reactions in the layer. This is in blood clotting. This is the eggshell. Likewise, it's in the bone, that it has to do with muscular contraction in the glandular secretion, but likewise they have to do in the nervous impulses. It intervenes in body weight gain, in egg production. And a very important thing is that it likewise works in the pulsation of the heart muscle. Many of the infarctions that our layers suffer is because of a bad calcium nutrient supply. Calcium is absorbed through an active transportation in the upper part of the small intestine. This is there is a passive diffusion in the proximal part of the duodenum. It is regulated by 1.25 dehydroxycalciferol. It is produced in the kidney because of a low calcium response. There are some factors that favor calcium absorption, such as acidification in the intestine because it keeps salts of calcium in solution, calcium level in the diet, vitamin D level, and available phosphorus. There are others that inhibit calcium absorption, such as phytates, oxalates, because salts can be formed. The presence of fluor, likewise of vanadium, that is seen regularly in some sources, mainly phosphates. An increase or nutritional absence of minerals that has the same values of calcium, such as manganese, zinc, iron, and copper. And obviously, there are some other diseases, such as infectious bronchitis, Newcastle disease, likewise synovia, mycoplasma, and mycoplasma synovia. It is important for you to take into consideration water quality. More than 90% of water from poultry farms have very hard waters. Therefore, we hope to keep a low pH in that water to acidulate and soften the water so that calcium salts can be easily solved and the layer can have calcium source when needed because of the large demand by its body. As calcium metabolism regulators, we have the available phosphorus in the diet, parathyroid hormone that activates excretion mechanism or deposition of calcium in bone. It controls the renal excretion of calcium in phosphorus in the urine, calcitonin, vitamin D, and carbon anhydrase. We're not going to delve into these issues because there are more important things that I want to share. Speaking of phosphorus, it's a non-metal element, electronegative. The ionic form is like the phosphate. It's one of the major components of bones. 80% of phosphorus is found in bones and in tissues. Phosphorus likewise is involved in very important reactions, not only in the bone. Phosphorus acts in the energy metabolism. This is metabolism of protein, amino acids, carbohydrates, and fats. Remember about this carboxylenation of fat, which is one of the mechanisms of metabolization, and therefore we need an organic. This is metabolism of nervous tissue. They have to do with a normal chemical in the blood. Skeleton development it has component of nucleic acid, component of some enzymes and coenzymes. It has to do with the storing and transportation of energy. Phosphorus level is very important, mainly when they are in fat because of legislation, because of it's in fat, because of the economy. The excess use of phytates, because you should correlate the phosphorus level when there is problem in the chicken farm of prolapse. It is important for you to take into consideration phosphorus levels because maybe something is going on with that phosphorus levels. Layer hens have an excellent mechanism for phosphorus and calcium management. They have a ratio of calcium and phosphorus that are incompatible with the life of other animals. Some paradigms that have to do with the reproductive are not valid with hen, as we're going to see later on. There are some factors impacting eggshells. For example, those having to do with the chicken, to nutrition, to pathology and environment. These factors are well known by all of you, and suddenly the author mentioning this didn't mention a couple of diseases that are impacting us in the farm. One is Mycoplasma synovia. We think that Mycoplasma gallisepticum, we declare the war to this, and I think that we are not winning that war, but we are eradicating the disease. And just lately, we have seen more Mycoplasma synovia than Mycoplasma gallisepticum. This is something that you have to consider. Where does calcium come in the shell? Shell's calcium comes from the ingestion of feed in 75% in the gut, in the gizzard, and in the GI tract. and obviously in the feed intake, such as granules of calcium carbonate. And the rest comes from the skeleton, from a medullary bone. If we were to make a parallel between calcium absorption at maximum requirements and the intake of calcium or incoming of calcium to the GI tract, we can see in this graph that they are parallel. The day in which the hen doesn't have calcium in order to meet its requirements and take it to the egg shell, it starts taking calcium from its bones, and then there is a negative balance of calcium if I don't meet that requirements, and that layer is going to be susceptible to be lost from the flock. This is my personal opinion. At the university, we were taught about the limiting barrel. In elementary chemistry, they spoke about the limit reaction. If there is a limiting reaction, it should be at a certain amount, and it limits the amount of the products that are going to be formed in a reaction. If we were to apply this concept to these nutrients, calcium, available phosphorus, and vitamin D3, these can be a limiting nutrient. In the field, we have situations such as this one. We have lots of phosphorus available, vitamin 3, but low calcium. This problem is shown when we have a high calcium demand, when we are depositing calcium in the eggshell, in the reproducing apparatus of the hen. This is the most frequent time in which mistakes are made, and this works as follows. It is quite common that most of the veterinarians think, and what they apply is to increase vitamin D3 levels. Well, that's true that vitamin D3 increases calcium absorption, but is there more? If there is no more calcium available, we're going to have a deficiency. The same effect of vitamin D3 can be with a high calcium availability, such as citrate, gluconate, calcium lactate, and other sources that can be achieved. In addition of being costly, they are water soluble, but they work very well. In my opinion, it's cheaper to handle this with a calcium level. It's cheaper, practical, and in the future we can save more animals, more hens. So here we have a concept of the reserve bone. What's the medullary bone? It's a secondary bone system only seen on females. It is formed before sexual maturity, before laying eggs. It provides calcium for the eggshell when in the GI tract there is not enough of calcium, and it appears in the femur, in the ribs, and the pelvis bone, 30% in each one of them, and in the hen's body it has the only metabolic activity. Take a look at what can happen if there is a mismanagement of a medullary egg. These are layers receiving a calcium deficient diet from 1 to 7 days for the femur.
En 7 días la ponedora pierde.
Femur, the hen goes 1/3 of the calcium content in the femur, and in the tibia it reduces to half, and in the humerus 40%. This has been shown by several authors. And if you have a problem, you have to take a look at the hen's diets or nutrients. Likewise, there is another problem. Calcium retention in the layer doesn't exceed 60%, and this is mainly due to the particle size. Then you can see here that as I increase calcium level in the diet, I can therefore have a greater calcium retained. That is why we need to use high calcium diets. I have to offset more than the amount of calcium, the particle size, in order to keep calcium stones in the hen's body so as for the hen to use it whenever is needed. You can see here how an increase in calcium level in a diet increases the specific gravity of the egg and the shell's quality. Therefore, as I increase calcium level in the diet, I have a better eggshell. not everything is good when you increase calcium in the diet. In addition of improving eggs shell, there is a problem for those who feed in batteries. This is feces wetness increases. Well, I can tell you that it's easier to have a ventilation system or to remove hens waste than losing hens, because if you lose layers, you don't only lose the hens but the eggs, and the business is to lay eggs and not to dry waste or feces. It has been shown that the bone mobilization is proportionally inverse to the content of calcium, and shells obtained are coarser. This is there should always be calcium present in the intestine, and therefore the eggshells would be better, and likewise the hen's bones would be better, because therefore she's not going to use her reserves so as to put calcium in the eggshell. As the egg size increases, the eggshell increases, and the content of grams is higher for that hen to be well fed. We go from 2.24 up to 2.56. Now, we should have calcium stones inside the hen's body.
Perdón. Bueno.
Okay, in this diagram you can see the entire passage for the formation of an egg since ovulation. But I think that it's more important to describe it this way. Look at calcium deposition in the shell. Almost 80% is obtained, maybe even more, in the dark phase. And that's why I need to have calcium reserves for this stage. And if you have a look at this. When the shell is formed, the calcium that the hen has is increased in order for it to be deposited in the shell in the blackout. The pH in the crop and in the gizzard is decreased as a consequence of the need of the high requirement of calcium in order to create the shell. Here you can see that the pH decreases in the dark hours, so that the source of calcium can be increased in the intestine, in the gizzard and in the bowel. Have a look at this. When the hen is not creating a shell, which is the red line, there's not a large requirement, there's no calcium retention. But when in the blue line, which is a hen creating a shell, you can see there is a large retention of ingested calcium to create the shell. And this you can see during the nighttime especially. Look at the phosphorus. Because this calcium has to get into the bloodstream, there is a large demand or large requirement for phosphorus. Look at the males. The red line is a male during the dark hours. He's resting and his metabolism is really low, and there's not a large demand for phosphorus. But for layers, when they are creating shells, look at the increase in mineral phosphorus in the bloodstream, which helps movement of calcium and for it to be used in the shell. Look at these typical findings. These are I'm sure you are very familiar with these. There's prolapse, there's death, there's hens which cannot stand, there's broken keel, twisted keel, and bones that are very prone to breaking. These are signs that show that there's a bad calcium nutrition, and there are additional ones such as infarctions. Remember that calcium also acts in cardiac movement, contraction. This is what happens in a regular farm. This information has been taken from the field. These are from actual farms. Look at the production, the brown line. It was falling and mortality was rising. And mortality was almost 3 times as high, hence started to die, and production started to decrease as a defense. Of course, calcium is also involved in laying eggs, and it may stop laying in order to protect the hen. So when we start supplementing calcium, which was not being supplied by mistake, mortality immediately decreases, and the hens take a little bit of time in order to recover, but then they start to achieve their prior levels of production. But of course, mortality cannot be recovered, and this is a very big loss. The most frequent paradigms with this topic are, if I overdo it with calcium, I create kidney problems in animals. This is not true. Kidney problems may appear after the 10th week, only up to the 10th week, because after 12 weeks the skeleton is already created and there won't be any problems because I have excess calcium. Of course, well, I wish that there are not very high levels of calcium but during the growth stage, but during the laying stage there won't be any problems with this, because remember that birds use calcium only during the nighttime and they use everything, and according to the particle size it is excreted in the feces. Sometimes they say that I don't have enough people it's impossible to be supplemented, but this is not true. Something else that they say is that it can be supplemented at any time of the day. It's the same. Well, it's not the same, but it's better if you do it than if you don't. All of calciums are the same. They are all rock. No, it's not true. Some are better than others. Some are more soluble than others. And it can be tested in any laboratory. My water is the better. Oh, this is not necessarily true. Some waters are really hard and they have trouble solubilizing and gasifying the GI tract. I think most waters need to be acidified. I supplement in one day all of the calcium of 1 week. Well, this is not advisable. If you have no choice, it's okay, but it should be supplemented at least 3 times a week, maybe every day. But it's better to do it once a week than not doing it. I never supplement. Well, this guy is producing chickens and he's not producing eggs. Necessary calcium is already complete in the food. I've heard this even by colleagues which have worked for years in food plants. Well, I have bad news for these guys. Calcium is not in the food. They need rock for retention, and the rocks have to be over 2 millimeters in diameter because birds can only uptake up to 2 millimeters in the gizzard. It has to be supplemented after the week 30 or 60. No, this is not true. It has to be supplemented earlier. If I use food that has high calcium, birds don't eat. This is not true. If I start using rocks from the growth period, these birds have a longer GI tract, and so it's easier for them to eat more. Particle size does not matter in calcium. This is false. Size does matter when we talk about calcium. If you see the size of the rocks that I have to use here in Argentina, it's very common to use oyster shells. You are blessed and you can use this, but we don't have this. We have to use calcium carbonate rocks or marble rocks. Well, I have seen sizes here in Uruguay and in Argentina, and I've seen that they are very small particles. I think that you should demand from producers that they give you a bigger size of particle. And here you can see the gizzard. When you do a necropsy, you need to see the gizzard of a suitable layer for eggs. Otherwise, you will have trouble in the field and of food. You need to see the particles in food. Food is not nice, but you need to see the particles to be able to see them. In the first image, you can see feed, and the second is a comparison with corn. And in the third one, sometimes you ask for coarse calcium, but birds cannot eat rocks. Okay, here you can see that birds solubilize the calcium, which is below 0.5 and 1 millimeters, is released in the feces, and so we recommend that the size has to be between 3 and 4 millimeters so that they can be retained for 2 or 3 days in the gizzard, and when they are made soluble they change size and they are excreted in the feces. In my country, we use the bird feces as an organic fertilizer, and it's being said that the feces are being adulterated with rocks. I'd rather have the people say this than having my hens die because of a lack of calcium. Here you can also see the difference between using powdered calcium and particles. Here you can see that there is a higher percentage in the tarsum, in the vertebrae. There's a higher resistance against breakage, and there's a higher reposition of calcium and hardness in these bones. Because we don't have much time. How are we doing with time? Okay. Here you can see that the size of the particle, we are comparing meal and a mixture. In most cases, in production, we used rocks, mixture with rocks. In feed consumption, we also have the same idea, preconception, that if they have calcium, birds don't eat. This is not true. In specific egg gravity, in the quality of the shell, in almost every case, the mixture of rock and meal did better than meal. This is completely proven. Here you can see a practical case where we estimated the calcium use. Here we have a calcium requirement to produce eggs of 2.2 grams in the shell. And the requirement was 0.8 grams, and the total was 3 grams as a requirement. And if this calcium is retained at 60%, we have food consumption of 100 grams and a normal calcium content of 3.8%. So we would need 3 grams of calcium as a requirement and a 60% retention. The requirement per day for a layer would be 5 grams. And so we would have a deficit of 5 required grams minus 3.8, which I am giving the hen, so 1.2 grams per bird per day. And this is what the rocks cover in the dark hours. So in 2 days, the hen would be using the entire calcium of the shell, and in 16 days, the total calcium of its body. So after 1 week, we can lose hens. So this is very important to be taken into account. And it's as easy as to just make sure that there are rocks in the gizzard. It's that easy and that simple and cheap. There is a very controversial issue. Some authors have been saying for many years, have talked about the use of pre-laying feed, and some authors later said that this feed is not required. Let's see something first. It's recommended that pullet nutrition is made based on a maximum bone mineralization, and the net result of sexual maturity is to finish the process of medullary bone formation. Remember that laying is a reproductive biological function where some hormones are involved, and now it turns out that farmers have started to make persistent birds out of the other hens, and the hens that were persistent hens have turned them into precocity birds. And after 16, 17 weeks, they have taken these birds up to 16 to 17 weeks, and we thought that this wouldn't have any consequences. Well, we are killing birds because in addition to this, we have to do this with light stimuli, and light stimuli make layers to make them develop even if they are not ready to mature sexually, even if they are not ready. So if light is not used properly in the weight of the bird, what I will achieve is that mortality will increase. I've seen this in the field. This is almost a mathematical rule, and this is because of mismanagement of these things, not just light and light intensity, but also because we're not taking into account that hormonal stimulation of the animals is conducted is done earlier, is before then the medulla bone is created. So I think that pre-poster feed is still very important. And why pre-laying feed? Well, this is what I was trying to say. This is what we have, but producers want this. And in addition to that, they want this. So I can't drink milk and eat beef from the same cow. I have to do something, and one of the things that I have to do is to watch for bone nutrition, to check that the birds are uniform, that they are in their appropriate weight, and they are well fed, they receive their nutrients. This is okay. We have conducted many works in our technical research department, and we have found that layers, even with a mismanagement of calcium nutrition in the stage between 12 and 18 weeks, they can even lose length in the tarsus. This is proven. This has been proven. You can see the yellow is without supplements, B is with supplement between 12 to 18 weeks, and C has the same supplement between 12 and 35 weeks. Look at production. I'm sorry. Look at tarsus gain and look at production. So it's worth listening to this, doing this. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a comment, a remark, going back to... Okay, I'd like to go back to this because I think this is very important. I've been consulted from many farms when I see this mismanagement in early laying, either because there's an increase in luminosity or because there's a mismanagement in the light plan. So we will have animals that after 35 weeks have almost a 2-digit mortality rate. And so we have seen that without this mispractice, because I think it's a good practice, but I think that they are not applying it correctly. Without this stimuli, this pressure on production, mortalities are only 6 to 7% and not of. So when you change the practices, mortalities are from 18 to 20 to 22% and up to 30. So you can get very good eggs. You can get 8, 10, 14, 15 eggs in the first 2 or 3 weeks of advantage with the average, but then you lose maybe 1/4 or 10 or 15% of the flock. And so I think that we have to consider this pre-laying feed. This should be given 2 to 3 weeks before the animal starts laying. And this feed does not have to have more than 1 to 2% calcium. It's not just about calcium. This stage is really important because that's when the reproductive system is being the creation of it's finished. So that's when the animal needs to have more amino acid and at least 5% more fat for the creation of these organs. So a good pre-laying feed needs to have a mean calcium level of 2.5%, but also 5% fat, and in addition to that, from 5 to 10% increase in protein quality when we talk about amino acids. So with this, we could achieve first a very good bone mineralization, a good formation of this bone and its proteic base so that it can be then deposited, the medullar bone. With this, we could achieve a better management of mortality, and I am sure that we would inhibit mortality. So if we always make sure that hens have rocks before they lay the first egg, if we did this, we would have much, much lower mortality rates. What I'm saying, what I'm telling you, we've proven it in many, many layers, and we've had excellent results, even on the floor, on the ground. And sometimes in some lines there's practically no death rate. In these lines, in some lines we have decreased mortality. We have cut it down to half. they have been decreased to 2.3 total. And in the case of batteries, the mortalities that used to be from 18 to 20% can be decreased to one-figure numbers just by managing calcium. And it's not expensive. It's only 5 cents of a dollar for calcium carbonate and 6 or 7 for oyster shell. So I think that this is key. The management of bone mineralization and good management of nutrition in layers. And I would like to talk to you about a thought. First, I want to talk about Medellin, which is my city. I wish that you come to it sometime. It's beautiful. This is a thought by the Pope when he was a cardinal in Germany. Today he's a Pope. I would like to translate the little part that I'm interested in. He criticizes that hens are cluttered together in a way that they are almost cartoons. And of course that for us it's more important to produce food than for them to be comfortable. But what I'm saying is we should feed them well. Thank you very much.